when I was in grammar school, we had a motto, and I'm not sure if all schools do, but ours did. And it showed up everywhere. It was on the flag that hung outside the school. It was on a patch that you could put on a blazer or on a book bag. It was in a school song. And I remember singing it. And the last line of the song was, "Great is the search for truth." So I'm not sure at that point in my life, I really knew what it meant, but the words themselves were deeply etched on my brain, and I've never forgotten them. And they've really deepened in meaning over the many years since then. Truthfulness, searching for it, orienting towards it is really a worthy task. That's what that motto was telling me. And of course, this was a school, and the words, I think, were said to inspire a striving in education, to learn and understand the world. But as I've aged, and as I study particularly Buddhism, it seems to me that the real truth seeking is just as much internal, right? What is my truth? Can I see it and be truthful with myself and with others? Can I interact in the world in a truthful way? These words keep reverberating inside me as we study this parami. You know, really being willing to be truthful with ourselves and with others is difficult. I keep asking myself why that is. And I think that it's because there's a real vulnerability that we expose when we're truthful. We can be easily wounded, which I looked up and found out is one of the definitions of vulnerability. And our instinct is to protect ourselves. It starts really early in our lives. I think of the toddler at 2 or 3 who's just learned to talk, who says they didn't take the cookie, they didn't hit their sibling, because they're scared of the repercussions of being honest. So as we grow up, we continue to protect ourselves from that vulnerability of telling the truth. And we do it by denying, exaggerating, lying, hiding, all in an effort to feel safe, or at least safer. And we all know how that feels. It really tangles us up in a way. It confuses our minds when we get caught in a lie. And it deadens us, it constricts our hearts. And something about it feels really unsettled. But truthfulness, when we're willing to land there, it absolutely can be vulnerable. And it allows us to rest, to be clear and at peace, because our minds are calm and we can more easily feel into a groundedness in the body. Being truthful unifies the mind and the heart. It means that we're being congruent. And I really like that word. It lands for me. Its definition is in part to be true to ourselves. And I can feel the sense of being aligned and clear and calm. And I hope that you can feel that too. There's a lightness and simplicity to being congruent. The less we exaggerate or lie or deny, the fewer ripples there are, both internally and externally, right? Ripples in our minds, conflicts within ourselves, and also in our relationships. The less we hurt ourselves and others. Mark Twain says, if you tell the truth, you don't need a good memory. Well, all I can say is, I better tell the truth then. Even something so simple, like admitting that you don't know something that you think you should know, like a vocabulary word. I used to cringe, almost make myself small and feel embarrassed when I didn't understand someone because they used a word I didn't know. But I wouldn't say anything and pretend that I understood, right? I was trying to fake it. And it's taken time. But now I feel more comfortable to just ask right in the moment, what's that word mean? And I've kind of come to, so what if someone thinks I'm not so smart? Which of course was always my fear. And what a relief that small shift was. It's palpable, even when I speak about it. And interestingly, admitting to someone I don't know the meaning of a word, showing just that little bit of vulnerability and trusting them to hold it, it forms a connection. Truthfulness builds trust in a relationship. But truthfulness starts internally, being truthful with ourselves. And Catherine spoke on Monday to how hard that can be sometimes, especially when our sense of identity is involved in it. And also, she talked about how it can take time to clarify. Our conditions are always changing, and sometimes recognizing those changes takes time. My husband made a pretty major career change at midlife, and it was pretty scary to first admit to himself that he was very unhappy in his job, one that paid well, in which he worked hard and was respected. And it was a job that at one time, maybe 15 years earlier, had been really fulfilling. But over those years, slowly he changed and the job changed too. Conditions change. And he was feeling pretty deadened. And going to work was a drag. So letting that truth in wasn't easy. He knew that if he really opened to it and acted on it, it would upturn his life. He'd have to start over. And that's scary. We have so much identity and security tied up in our jobs. So, I mean, ultimately, that is exactly what he chose to do. Go back to school, become a beginner again. And he was studying something that enlivened him now at this point in his life. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process of self-reflection. But opening to his truth has brought him so much happiness. It's always ongoing. Finding what is true for us, understanding ourselves, our motivations, our reactions, our place in the world at this point in time. It takes patience and practice to become clear. I hope you can see this process for yourself with whatever circumstances you're in the midst of. It might be a job, like my husband, or it could be a relationship that's changing. It might be living into the truth of your sexuality. I've told you before about my friends who lost their son a few years ago. And I just visited with them, and I watch over time how they're continuing to live into the truth of life without their son. They're peeling away the layers of grief as they're able to open to the truth of what their lives are now. None of this is easy. But I do think if we're willing, our truth continues to deepen. We settle more deeply into ourselves. live more fully into who we are. I really like the analogy of an onion. There are layers and layers. And as we peel the layers back and we get a deeper understanding of ourselves, we can live from a place that feels more congruent. And that brings a contentedness. Maybe it's even a quiet strength. Each time we land in the truth, we strengthen our trust in it. And it's just like this path. This path really is a path of truthfulness. This congruence that happens within ourselves lets us live more fully in relationship with others too. As you know, I work at a hospice house. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of truthfulness there. Instead of denying death or fighting against death, my clients have accepted the truth of their death. And actually, this is the only way they're admitted to hospice. All that's offered there is comfort measures, nothing heroic. So that doesn't mean that the family always has fully accepted. There certainly are a lot of dynamics that go on at this time in someone's life, and acceptance is a process. But what I find is that it's so clear when I walk into a room. You actually can feel it. Something just feels different in those rooms where everyone's resting in that vulnerability of the truth. There's a peacefulness and a strength, a centeredness, and even sometimes a joy. The conversation between family members, it's different. There's very little planning or fixing, but there's a lot more storytelling. There's more touch. There's more displays of love, and there's more connection. In the patient accepting their truth, they offer a space where everyone can be more truthful. And it seems that there's such a relief to no longer being denying death. It's so poignant. So even if we're not in a room that's holding death, truthfulness in our relationships can open up a field between us. Being brave enough to show our vulnerability is really an invitation for another to also. And the layers of self-protection are peeled back so we can discover the way things really are. So because those of us here in this Sangha, we come at this from a Buddhist orientation, we can see our efforts at being truthful with ourselves in light of the three characteristics: the truth of suffering, that grasping and pushing away that causes suffering, the truth of impermanence, and the truth of non-identity, of selflessness. Each of these characteristics is apparent in every example I gave today, and every example that others have shared over the past few days. And maybe this is helpful to be aware of. It's kind of as a handle to help us identify when we're hiding from the truth, and also what the path to truth might be for us. If we find ourselves avoiding, we know to turn towards. If we find ourselves holding on, we can see that we need to let go gently. If we find ourselves caught in thoughts of me, my, and mine, when we see that we know our suffering will lessen if we can loosen that grip of identification. Each time that we're able to rest in these truths, we feel it. It feels congruent and like peace. And this is the path we're moving on. So just a really quick quote I want to give you at the end. I just found this and it just touched exactly what I've been saying. This is from Hermann Hesse, the author. He says, "I have no right to call myself one who knows. I was one who seeks, and I still am. But I no longer seek in the stars or in the books. I'm beginning to hear the teachings of my blood pulsing within me. My story isn't pleasant. It's not sweet and harmonious like the invented stories. It tastes of folly and bewilderment, of madness and dream, like the life of all people who no longer want to lie to themselves." So thank you all so much for your attention.